Alright, so this is how you assemble the buffers on the hanging spool shelf. There's 4 printed components. There's the main buffer plate, the lid, the wheel, and this tiny little guy here is the hubcap. You only need 3 vitamins, a bearing of some sort, a M3 10mm screw, and one of these pass-through connectors. What are they called? PC4/M10s. And this is how you assemble it. It's really quite simple. Start with the wheel, and you're going to want it to where the large printed area that was printed down on the plate, because it could elephant foot and make this a little bit harder from the other side. You want to push the bearing in from this side, and it doesn't take too much force. Then you just simply, you don't put it on the wheel like that, or on inside the main buffer plate like that. You're going to want to flip it over, because the extra lip here is intended to help hold the filament in when the lid is open. Alright, next you take the hubcap and the big flat part that printed down, you put the screw inside of that and just drive it in gently. Now that it's all the way through, it's ready to be put right here into the middle of the hub. Doesn't have to be tight. It does need to be able to spin, so this one is a little bit too tight. And you're going to be screwing this directly into plastic, not into any kind of metal thread, so you want to be gentle with it. There you go, much better. Good enough. Alright, then you take the connector, and you should be able to thread it right into this. Now the best way I've found to do this is you just line the two up, and then you roll it backwards against the thread until you feel it click. There, it just clicked and kind of fell into place. That means that it just fell into the threads. And at that point, even just with your fingers, you should be able to get this thing put into place. Otherwise, you can use a little wrench for it. I'll show you in a minute how to put this thing onto the rest of the buffer plate, but basically what you're going to want to do is you take your lid, and it will, two of these lips, two of these little flanges are closer together than the other one, and the two that are closer together go on the upper side of the buffer plate. So these two will line up about here and here. You're going to want to push it, slide it, twist it so that it's resting up against this arm, and then you simply just snap that into place. Yeah, if those are the hardest part to print, because it has to have a little bit of support. If you need to clean it up just a little bit so that there's less goop, or if it hung down right there, you might have to just clean it with a knife or a Dremel or something like that, so that you get a nice tight. That one's not as tight right there, but this one is very, very tight. This one's probably the most important because it's the lonely one on the opposite side of the other two. Just as long as it'll hold it into place, and then the buffer can spin, we're good to go. Do that exact same process a grand total of 5 more times, and next I'll show you how to assemble the entire shelf. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and assemble the shelf with the buffers hanging underneath. What we're going to need is you need at least 2 8mm smooth rods. These ones are really long, longer than some of them that you're probably going to have sitting around. These ones are 46 centimeters long. I find that is almost a perfect fit to fit inside of the IKEA lac table enclosure. It could probably get up to 50 centimeters, maybe even 52, but this length of 460, it fits the shelf really, really well. I can have up to 5 spools on it, all side by side, and they fit nice and neat. Gonna need 2 of these end roller guides, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of these middle roller guides that are kind of double-sided. And the idea is that when your spool sits on these things, they're going to be sharing spaces, so they'll end up lining up right next to each other, and then the spool right next to it will be sharing the other two wheels. But then on the ends, you only need one. Okay, I'd like to point out something about the bearings right here. Shielded bearings, they don't spin as freely as the open bearings that you get out of fidget spinners, but on these shelves you don't want it to spin too freely. So you're going to want to make sure you have at least some of the shielded bearings put into here. So the ones that came with the MMU2 and 2S, those are ones are preferred. I just happen to have some of these fidget spinner bearings, and I'm going to go ahead and use some of those as well. Unfortunately, I broke one of these as I was putting it all together. Actually, I had the shelf put together. I decided to take it apart for the sake of the video, and I broke it on the way out, so I'm going to have to replace that one. But this is how you build up the shelves. You start with start with one of the end pieces, and you want to make sure that this part of the guide is on the outside. So since this is going to be on the outside, I'm going to put this on first, and then I'm going to put a buffer. So now they're together. I'm going to put a middle one, a middle roller guide. Another buffer, another middle roller guide, another buffer, if I was going to be able to complete the whole assembly, I would then do buffer the roller guide that's broken, a buffer, roller guide. Starting to lose some of my bearings here, so I'm going to have to fix that before I assemble all this. But this is basically how it should look. Now the next thing I'm going to do, probably off camera, is just feed this next pipe through all these other holes with the bearings in place. Alright, so now we've got all of them assembled. I'm keeping them nice and tight and close together and stuff like that for the moment. It'll just make it easier to get it mounted up onto the shelf brackets. I have the smooth rods close to the same length. Essentially it's the same thing as tapping it on a table, so that the ends are at about the same length. This will be helpful when I mount it up to the shelf as well. So give me just a moment. There's my broken one. Give me just a moment and I'll show you how to mount this thing up onto the shelf. Okay, hope this turns out. This is looking through the side of my enclosure. Again, this shelf could be mounted underneath any other type of wooden shelf, a ceiling or something like that. In this case, it was designed and built for a lack enclosure, and this is looking through the side panel of that lack enclosure. And the way that this shelf comes in here, they just kind of rest on the sides, and then as you can see here, there's a 2mm lip right back there that it's going to want to be butting up against. And the same thing in the back. Front, back. Alright, now you just space them to be wherever they need to fit. So you just kind of space them, use a spool to get them in the right spot. Alright, now this is a cool part. Let me re-angle the camera here just a sec. This is how you actually load it. Once you have your tubes connected, the filament goes down between the two smooth rods, hooks underneath the wheel, once, twice, 3 times around the wheel, and then it just tucks right down inside of this pipe. push it down and you load the MMU like you would normally. The last part, after that's in place, the lid, make sure you don't pinch the filament in the back, and then it just snaps on just like that. That side's now loaded and ready to go, and you can repeat the same thing for all 5.